Ray Miller spent 38 years as a high school history teacher. 38 years standing in front of chalkboards, staring out at a sea of teenagers and explaining one fundamental, unbreakable rule of the universe. Every single action in the past has a consequence in the future. Economics, wars, laws, treaties, nothing happens in a vacuum. History always comes to collect its due. But for a man who spent his entire adult life teaching that lesson, Ray never could have imagined that the federal government would dig into his own personal past just to dismantle his present. He had educated thousands of kids, but he was about to fail the most terrifying financial exam of his own life. The story really starts in 2024. Ray sold his late parents' old house. He didn't do it to buy a sports car or fund a lavish retirement. He did it to help his son David afford a down payment on a modest home, trying to keep his family safe in an economy that was eating young families alive. It was a massive sacrifice. But 2 years later, Medicare was still charging Ray every single month for that act of generosity, and his wife Helen still remembered the anniversary trip to Europe they had canceled, because Ray was desperately trying to hold their budget together. Now look, I've sat across enough desks inside the system to know that when people hear a story like that, they expect to find some reckless gamble. A bad stock tip, a shiny promise from a late-night infomercial. That wasn't Ray. Not even close. Ray was 67 years old. He was the kind of teacher who kept extra granola bars in his bottom desk drawer for kids who came to school hungry. A man who planned his entire existence around a predictable, modest state pension. He was part of that sandwich generation, carrying weight from both directions at once, helping adult children who were struggling with inflation, quietly worrying about his own retirement savings. But his knees were giving out. Decades of standing on hard linoleum floors had worn away the cartilage, forcing him to step down from full-time teaching to become a part-time substitute. He was just trying to save his health, lower his blood pressure, and keep a foot in the profession he loved. The nightmare didn't start with a dramatic phone call or an eviction notice. It started on a Tuesday in November 2026, 5:30 in the evening. The school had already exhaled after the chaotic rush of 3,000 teenagers heading for the buses. The hallways hung with that heavy, echoing silence you only find in old brick buildings after hours. The air smelled of chalk dust, cheap floor wax, and the fading heat of the iron radiators. Ray was sitting alone at his worn wooden desk under the hum of a flickering fluorescent light. In his right hand he held a red grading pen, in his left a small stack of mail he had brought from home. He opened an envelope from Medicare mechanically, just another piece of daily administrative noise. Then he stopped. He looked down at the single page, and the silence in that empty classroom suddenly felt completely suffocating.
I was grading an essay. Some kid had written an absolute historical absurdity about the Great Depression, and I had my red pen hovered over the paper, ready to strike a heavy, unforgiving line right through it. Then I glanced at the Medicare letter. Part B and Part D premiums. I kept taking off my glasses and wiping them on my sweater, thinking my eyes were failing me, like the lenses were dirty. But the number staring back didn't change. Roughly $6,000 to $7,000 in extra surcharges over the course of the year. I couldn't catch my breath. My fingers went completely numb, and that red pen just slipped out of my hand. It rolled across the desk, leaving a long, ugly, bleeding line right across my student's essay. $6,000 for a retired public school teacher? That isn't a minor inconvenience. That's the winter heating bill. That's the grocery budget. I sat there in the quiet, a man with 2 master's degrees, realizing I was suddenly, inexplicably, financially drowning.
The wall clock ticked loudly in the empty room. Out in the hallway, a heavy door clicked shut as the night janitor moved down the corridor. Ray didn't move. He was completely paralyzed. Over my 40 years dealing with Social Security and Medicare paperwork, this specific pattern became agonizingly familiar. People discover, usually the hard way, that Medicare looks backward. When higher income appears in your tax history, extra Medicare charges follow you later. Months later, years later. They call it IRMAA, or Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. This delay catches even the most careful people completely off guard, especially people who thought the financial event was already buried in the past. Ray grabbed his phone. His hands were actually trembling. He called his accountant, an old friend named Jim, whom he'd trusted for 20 years. And before I let them speak, I want to slow this down, because this is where the clinical, unfeeling machinery of the government meets the fragile reality of a human life. We talk about tax codes, thresholds, and brackets, but underneath those clinical words is usually a father trying to do one honorable thing who accidentally steps onto a landmine.
Ray, I'm pulling up your file right now on my screen. I'm sorry, my friend, but the math is correct. It's the house. That property you and your sister inherited and sold back in 2024. That capital gain from the sale pushed your income way up for that one single year. And that massive spike is still driving your Magi calculation today.
Jim, I sold that house 2 years ago to help David get his own place. I threw away my parents' old furniture. I packed up boxes of my own family's history just to prep it for a quick sale. That money didn't even stay in my account for a month. I wired it directly to his mortgage lender. How in God's name can the government charge me thousands of dollars for income I don't even possess anymore?
I know, Ray. I know it feels deeply unfair, but Medicare uses a strict 2-year look-back period. They are basing your 2026 premiums entirely on your 2024 tax return. You cross the income threshold, and the system absolutely does not care where that money went or why you spent it.
The accountant started explaining the cold mechanics of it. There is a specific tax income figure Medicare uses when deciding what people pay. It includes your regular income plus untaxed things, like municipal bond interest. They call it MAGI, or Modified Adjusted Gross Income. It isn't always the exact same number people see on the front page of a standard tax return. Calculations, thresholds, tiers. Ray kept nodding into the phone, but he wasn't hearing Jim anymore. His brain was stuck in 2024. He had spent his life teaching that every action in the past has a consequence in the present, but he never imagined the government would weaponize his own past against him. If you are out there after a long day, looking at old tax papers and wondering whether a decision from 2 years ago can still reach out and strangle your finances, I want you to keep listening. Stay with me, because we are going to a different location now. The place where the true devastation of IRMAA actually hits home. A few days later, pouring rain, a bitterly cold November evening. Ray drove his 10-year-old sedan over to his son's new house, the exact house he had surrendered his inheritance to help buy. He didn't plan to say a single word about the Medicare bill. He just wanted to see his grandson. He needed to look at the boy and feel like his financial sacrifice had been worth it. But when he walked into the small hallway, he saw his grandson sitting on an old wooden chair, one of the few pieces Ray had saved from his parents' estate. The boy was swinging his legs, getting ready to go outside, and he was wearing a thin autumn jacket, the kind that offers zero protection against a freezing Midwest November wind. Ray looked at his son, David, who was standing by the kitchen counter holding a stack of past-due utility bills. David caught his father's eye, looked at the boy's jacket, and offered a tired, guilty smile.
Dad, I know the jacket is too thin for this weather. I know. But after the mortgage payment and the baby's prescriptions this month, we're just completely tapped out. I promise, with my next paycheck, the very first thing I'm doing is buying him a proper winter coat. We're okay. I've got it under control.
Ray's hand instinctively twitched toward the inner breast pocket of his coat, right where he kept his wallet. Any grandfather in the world, in that exact moment, pulls out a $100 bill, hands it to his son, and says, "Go buy the boy a warm coat today. Take a break." But Ray's fingers froze against the fabric. He remembered the $6,000 debt hanging over his head like a guillotine. He remembered that next month, Medicare was going to start heavily draining his state pension. He had sold his family's history to give his son a head start, believing he was doing his ultimate duty as a father. And now, in the exact moment his family needed a tiny bit of help, he was financially paralyzed. He couldn't even buy his own grandson a winter coat. He slowly pulled his empty hand out of his pocket. "Let me tell you something. You have no idea how profoundly that kind of helplessness breaks a man's spirit until you experience it. It strips away your dignity. It was a deep, silent wound to his identity. Which brings us to the emotional core of this entire story. 2 a.m, Ray's own kitchen table. The house was pitch black except for the small yellow light glowing over the stove. Ray had stacks of tax returns, Medicare letters, and bank statements spread out like a battlefield map. He had his red grading pen in his hand again, circling and crossing out numbers with such aggressive force that the paper was actually tearing. Every red circle felt like proof that he should have known better. Every torn page was an indictment of his own intelligence. His wife, Helen, came downstairs in her robe. She walked over and looked at the absolute mess of paperwork. She understood the pressure he was under better than anyone in the world. She didn't offer empty, cinematic promises about how everything magically works out in the end. She was a practical woman. Instead, she walked to a kitchen drawer, pulled out a glossy travel brochure, and slapped it right on top of the torn tax returns. It was the European anniversary tour they had canceled 2 years ago to save money for their son.
Ray, look at me. We didn't sacrifice this trip just so you could sit here in the dark and eat yourself alive. You have spent 30 years pulling failing kids out of the gutter. You made them retake exams until they understood the material. Are you really going to let one piece of bureaucratic paper defeat you? You're a teacher, Ray. When a test is designed unfairly, a good teacher doesn't just cry over a failing grade. He studies the damn rules and figures out how to beat the system, stop fighting the past, sit down, do your homework, and fix our future.
A spoon clattered against a teacup. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background. And that is exactly when the emotional weather in that kitchen shifted. I wish I could tell you everyone makes this pivot. They don't. This is the exact moment where most people surrender. They get angry, they get embarrassed, they avoid the paperwork, and they just pay the penalty until it bleeds them dry. Avoidance has a way of making everything heavier. But Ray stopped being angry at the government. He didn't know it yet, but the turning point wasn't going to come from finding a mathematical mistake in Medicare's calculations. The calculations were doing exactly what they were legally designed to do based on that 2-year look-back. He put down the red pen and picked up the phone. He found a free, state-sponsored Medicare advisor known as a ship counselor. She was a patient woman working out of a small, cramped community center office. She sat with him for 2 solid hours. She looked at his mug. She looked at the house sale. She looked at his current teaching schedule. She reviewed the timelines. And then she explained the exact mechanical reality of the law. Listen to me very carefully right now, because if you are trapped in an IRMAA surcharge, this is the part you absolutely cannot afford to miss.
Ray, the capital gain from the house sale is what sank you. It caused the massive spike in your MAPE. But the sale of a property by itself is almost never a qualifying reason to remove the surcharge. The government absolutely does not forgive capital gains just because you were a good father and gave the money to your son. Tax law doesn't care about your heart. But what will save you is your knees. The fact that your health forced you to step down from a full-time contracted teacher to a part-time substitute is what Medicare explicitly calls a life-changing event. Specifically, a reduction in work hours. That is our legal trigger. The House created the problem, Ray, but your work hours are going to solve it.
The counselor reached into her desk and slid a very specific piece of paper across the table. Form SSA 44, the Medicare Reconsideration Form, the holy grail of IRMAA appeals. That right there is the turning point, the exact moment somebody moves from emotional despair into cold, hard, methodical documentation. Their posture changes, their breathing changes. The entire room feels different. Ray didn't argue about the unfairness of the house sale anymore. He focused entirely on the work reduction. Ray went home and pulled out a heavy 3-ring binder, the exact same kind of binder he had used for his daily lesson plans for 38 years. But instead of organizing the Civil War or the Industrial Revolution, he was plotting out his own financial survival. He treated this form like it was the final exam of his life. He marched down to the school district human resources office. He requested an official, stamped letter confirming his transition from full-time status to part-time substitute status. He gathered a year's worth of pay stubs, proving the severe drop in his working hours and income. He got a letter from his orthopedic doctor detailing the deteriorating condition of his knees. He sat at his kitchen table and filled out Form SSA 44, deliberately taking his red pen and checking the box for work reduction, evidence, documentation, more documentation, and then, just to be safe, additional documentation. I wish I were joking about the amount of paper, but I'm not. Then he mailed it, and the waiting began. Real life isn't a movie montage. The greatest victories usually arrive disguised as a stack of mind-numbing forms and procedural delays. Months passed. Requests went back and forth in the mail. One document needed a different date. Another form had to be completely resubmitted. A phone call led to a request for even more records. It was frustrating. It was exhausting. But it was completely normal. And during that long waiting period, Ray didn't stop. Every single month, he updated his projected income in his heavy binder. He tracked his substitute teaching hours. He noted anything that could possibly affect his future calculations. The binder started filling with dates, margins, notes, and reference codes. He treated his MAGI monitoring with the exact same ruthless discipline he used when grading final exams. Fear wasn't driving him anymore. Academic discipline was. Finally, 6 months after that first terrifying letter had arrived in the empty classroom, the grinding wheels of the federal bureaucracy yielded. Afternoon sun was pouring into Ray's kitchen. The house was warm. Helen walked in from the front porch holding the Daily Mail. She stopped, looked at an envelope with the return address of the Social Security Administration, and handed it to Ray without saying a word.
My hands weren't shaking this time. I felt completely steady. I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out the letter. I read the very first line, took off my glasses and rubbed my eyes. Then I put them back on and read it out loud to Helen. Approved. They accepted my reduction in work hours as a legitimate life-changing event. They recalculated my Medicare premium based on my current part-time income, completely bypassing that elevated income from the year I sold the house. We didn't owe that extra $6,000. I looked across the kitchen at my wife, and for the first time in half a year, the crushing, invisible weight on my chest lifted. I could finally breathe. The very next day, I drove to the department store, bought the thickest, warmest winter coat I could find, and took it to my grandson.
In his case, that is incredibly important for you to understand. In his case, the surcharge was removed after the proper documentation was reviewed. The house sale remained a part of his historical tax story, but the successful outcome came entirely through documented qualifying circumstances and relentless, persistent follow-through. There was no magic involved in this story. There were no secret loopholes. There was just documentation, process, and the vigilance of a man who refused to fail his final test. Because here is what Ray understood immediately afterward. The fight wasn't over. If you are somewhere between 50 and 70, this is the part I desperately wish more people understood. Winning one single review doesn't mean you get to stop paying attention. Ray still tracks his numbers. He still watches his income. He still updates that lesson plan binder. He treats MAGI monitoring like an essential part of his life, every month without fail. His hands are steady on the wheel because he finally understands the rules of the road. This story shows how disciplined tracking and understanding Form SSA 44 helped Ray Miller get out from under massive financial pressure. Bureaucracy is just a bad student trying to trick you if you aren't paying attention. I've sat across enough tables to know that most people don't need a perfect financial strategy. They need a repeatable one. Ray used the exact same habits that made him a successful teacher to protect himself financially. Nothing fancy, just consistency. Before you do any of this, please remember that every IRMAA case depends entirely on individual income history, specific documentation, and Medicare review decisions. I want you to use Ray's lesson plan method. Here are 6 actionable steps you can take right now to protect yourself. 1. Take a simple 3-ring binder. On the 15th of every month, Sit down with it exactly the way a teacher grades papers. Record your projected MEG, your expected income changes, and your potential Medicare impact. Write it down with a pen. Make it real. 2. Every Monday morning, review your handwritten tracking sheet. Treat it like a weekly lesson plan. Compare your actual income against what you projected so you are never flying blind. 3. Create a dedicated life event section inside that binder. If you sell a property, fully retire, or if your work hours significantly drop due to health, log it immediately. This is your pop quiz. Request official letters from your employer or doctor the very moment it happens. 4. On the last Friday of every month, look ahead. Estimate your next quarter income before surprises can accumulate. Treat it exactly like preparing for end-of-semester final exams. Don't wait for the test to start studying. 5. Keep a family photo tucked inside the front cover of that binder. Ray keeps a picture of his grandson wearing that new winter coat. On the last Monday of the month, take a really good look at your photo. Remind yourself exactly who those numbers and those complicated forms are really supposed to protect. 6. Finally, if you anticipate a MAGI spike from 2 years ago, line up your tracking sheet with your monthly paperwork. Proactively verify if any of your recent income changes, like retiring or reducing hours, qualify you to file Form SSA 44. Grab your red pen, check the boxes, and don't wait for the massive bill to arrive in the mail to start building your case. If you are somewhere between 50 and 70 and you are ready to stop being afraid of these letters and want to finally pass this exam, drop "I'm in" the comments below. I read them and I try to answer as many as I possibly can. We can figure out your situation together. This content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, tax, or legal advice. Individual situations vary. Consult a qualified professional or your local SHIP counselor before making any decisions. Names and identifying details have been changed for privacy. Frank Harlan is a narrative composite character used to illustrate common Medicare and IRMAA situations.